Right, joining us now on the set of the Canadian Science Policy Conference is a gentleman who's very well familiar with both science and television, Jay Ingram. Thank you very much for joining us today.
How are you?
I'm doing very well. You've been with Daily Planet and Quirks and Quirks as well. Science, obviously, a major part of your life, and communicating science is very important to you as well. Is it an easy thing to do?
I shouldn't laugh, perhaps, but I don't know. I don't think it's easy at all, and I think a lot of people are misled into thinking that all you have to do is a 3-hour media workshop in the afternoon on Friday, and suddenly you're a good communicator. And clearly that's not the case. And my colleagues and I, I might have worked on it longer than most of my colleagues, but I've been doing it for decades, and I still routinely find that things that I've done could have been a little bit better, could have tweaked this, could have changed that. So really, it's not easy at all.
When it comes to trying to break something down so that the average Joe will understand it, is it your job to do that, or is it the person that has the knowledge in the science area that comes to you and says, hey, I've got a great story?
Well, it depends on the format of, where does that person want to get their message out to? So if it's print, they can talk to you in practically any old way, and you can select lines that are understandable, and you can parse it and edit it that way. If they're going to be on TV, then really you have to work with them, encourage them, browbeat them a little bit to make sure that they speak clearly and without jargon and in an interesting way. And that goes deeper than just without jargon too. It really can be, and often is, the whole way you structure the story. Because we like to think of science. Telling a science story is kind of you go through all the detail and get to the punchline at the end. But in the media, it's the reverse. You want the punchline at the beginning, and then you can fill in some of the backstory. That's a major difference. And so these are the things that scientists at least have to be aware of, or media people have to help them deal with.
Do you think media does a good job of covering science?
Well, it's inconsistent the same way as, does media cover sports well? Not always. Science, not always. There are some media outlets that are better at it than others. But, you have to look at it not from the scientist's point of view. So a scientist will look at a tabloid newspaper and say, well, that's just garbage. But you've got to look at the tabloid newspaper's audience and say, what do you want? What does that paper know about them and know what they'll take away from this? And more often than not, it's not quite as bad as the scientist thinks. The scientist thinks that because there's no detail, but tabloid newspapers aren't about detail. So you really have to assess how good the media are based on who their audience is, where they're making their money from, because not everyone is taxpayer funded, and draw your conclusions on that.
At this conference, they've been talking about the importance of communication, but generally it seems to be between the academics, the scientists, government, and business. But you say that you should add another prong to that, and that should be getting it out to the public.
Well, certainly politicians have to be aware of that. I suppose you can have a closeted discussion among policymakers, some representatives of science funding agencies and politicians, but I don't know that that's very helpful. If you're excluding the electorate or the taxpayers. I just think that generally communicating important science policy issues has been done in a woefully inadequate way, and meetings like this hopefully will raise the bar.
When they're talking about a national science policy, what does that mean to you?
Well, to me it means, how are we going to make decisions about where to put money? And you get into words like strategically, but you have to be careful that what strategically means to the current government is actually best for the growth of science and the innovation that spins off it in the long term. And that just isn't always done. Politicians are much more concerned with what's going to happen this week, month, and year, and they want science to come up with results that they can talk about. But in fact, science generally doesn't work on that kind of calendar. And so you have to have astute people making decisions that 10 years down the road will keep Canadian science healthy.
Okay. You're in a panel today, and it's titled "The Second Mouse Gets the Cheese: Turning Talk of Creativity into a Sustainable Creative Economy." Tell us a little bit about what you expect when you haven't gone into it yet. Tell us what you expect when you go into it.
I think the more important question is what are they going to expect?
Fair enough.
You know, the second mouse gets the cheese can be interpreted many ways. The first one is the first mouse dies in the trap, and so the second mouse gets the cheese.
Yeah.
But I look at it from a slightly different point of view, and that is when it comes to creativity and actually creating something that's useful and that people like, it's not always the first person that had the idea, and most often it's not. Collaboration is better fuel for creativity than just the solitary genius. And so the second, third, fourth, 10th, 20th mouse are all important. Maybe they should all share.
They should all get some cheese.
Yeah.
Fair enough. When you think about a conference like this, it's the fourth year that it's being held. They're already getting set for next year as well. Do you see the benefits of something like this?
Well, you know, better to have a conference than not to have a conference for sure. What I think the concern might be that it stays in-house a little bit. And I think that, you know, it's clear when there are issues like, when things happen like scientists marching on Parliament Hill and people becoming aware that science jobs are being eliminated, then clearly it's a public issue. And so the outcomes from a conference like this, I think, should somehow get to the public in an efficient way. And I don't mean the erudite public that are already working on science policy. I mean people that just care about science. I mean, you know, you take, for example, the 200,000 or so people that would watch Daily Planet on Discovery Channel every night. They may not be interested in science policy, but I bet they would be interested in knowing if such and such a policy is carried out, here's what the science landscape is going to look like. So I think even that audience should somehow be informed. But, you know, science policy is not a very televisually friendly business.
Unless you're sitting
Although
on
we're
this set.
making it
Exactly.
incredibly interesting.
Exactly, unless you're here. For you, you know, people know you from Daily Planet, and they know you from Quirks and Quarks. You've got a company now, and this is what you're labeled as here, as the co-founder of Beakerhead. So perhaps before we go, you can tell us a little bit about Beakerhead.
Well, Beakerhead, very quickly, is what happens when engineering and arts collide. So what we're trying to do is create a year-round movement in Calgary, highlighted by 5 days in September, where the streets, we hope, will be filled with creations that both engineers and scientists and technologists and artists had input into. And one of the underlying reasons for doing this is students get siloed very quickly into engineering, science, math, art, whereas many of those people who are now kind of trapped have strong creative instincts that would apply to the other silo and yet really don't get a chance. So we're trying to create those kinds of chances. So do-it-yourselfers, people who are, you know, want to do art on a big scale, why not get them together and create a giant flame-throwing dragon? I mean, you know, so that's what Beakerhead's all about.
Right, I think they have one of those at West Edmonton Mall in Edmonton.
Yeah, well, except we want to see them all over the place.
Fair enough, fair enough. Jay, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks.
We've been chatting with Jay Ingram.